Right, so this is a tutorial sort of video that I've been wanting to make for a little bit about a unit type that confused me when I first started playing Total War Warhammer, which is the Skirmish Cavalry. It's not exactly what you expect when you first look at it, coming in as a foreigner to the Total War series. You get used to, based off the armies that you're going to play as at first, which are probably Empire, High Elves, or Dwarfs, you're going to assume that Missile Infantry is your strongest defensive unit, and it's going to get a load of kills, and it's just going to tear infantry apart by its lonesome. Because for the Empire, the High Elves, and the Dwarfs, that is how the game works at its core. But Skirmish Cav doesn't really work like that. And it's largely because of the low model count. For here, I've chosen probably the most generic unit of Skirmish Cavalry in the game, which is the Yeoman Archers for Bretonnia. They get 45 archers. The average unit of archers in this game has 90 men to it. That's like half the damage. And Bretonian archers aren't very good to begin with. But Skirmish Cav has a different use that I think there's a variety of uses to Skirmish Cav. And one I think you can figure out fairly quickly. And it's this little skirmish mode button right here that really helps. Skirmish mode, for those who aren't aware, is a mode you can set on units that causes the AI to take control of the unit anytime it gets close to an enemy unit. And it makes them run away from any enemy units while still firing backwards at them. It works well enough if you have a unit that you want to just fire and forget on and you don't want to take the time to pay attention to them. Which, if you've got a load of skirmishers, you're probably going to do that. But it's not that effective because the AI isn't terribly smart. And look at the volleys that they are shooting at these spearmen, and these spearmen are not taking much damage. If this was a proper unit of peasant bowmen, this would have actually done quite a bit of damage to these spearmen. But the appeal here to Skirmish Cav that you can see right here is that you can get melee units, especially with the AI, because the AI is dumb as hell. Players probably aren't going to fall for this if you're playing multiplayer, but the AI is dumb enough to chase after missile units that are firing at them. So for several factions, the appeal of Skirmish Cav is to either break the enemy formation by getting them to divide up, or trying to aggressively pull the enemy to an area that is less advantageous for them. Which is ordinarily the job of artillery, but several factions are lacking artillery, and several factions more have pretty mediocre artillery. Bretonian artillery isn't the best. I'm fond of the trebuchet, but it's not great. This is kind of the base use of Skirmish Cav, I would say. There are one or two units of Skirmish Cav that actually can do good enough damage on their own that they might as well just be fast missile infantry. Outriders with grenade launchers are definitely the big example of a missile cavalry unit that can just destroy infantry. But this is the primary use of most Skirmish Cavalry. However, there's another use of Skirmish Cav that I am quite fond of. And I'm going to go ahead and try and flank around the back here on these spearmen. Skirmish Cav can be a very diverse unit type that can be used very well both against melee units and missile units, though in different ways. Because Skirmish Cav typically has... Oh, well, yeah, they're just turning around. They're not going to let me flank them. Whatever. Skirmish Cav is typically faster than your regular Cav. It's usually around 90 speed, whereas, like, Empire Knights are 60 to 70 speed, I believe. So they've got that speed behind them, and they are deceptively good in melee. Their stats don't show it, but the charge speed they build up on the charge, not to mention their cavalry level charge bonus, makes it so that they can flank around and hit the enemy's missiles or artillery. And that can be really important, especially for, let's say, Norska, because Norska doesn't have shock cavalry, which you might ordinarily use for that purpose. A way I often think of Skirmish Cavalry is light cavalry that also happens to have a missile attack. Because generally speaking, when your faction has access to light cavalry, like, let's say, the regular mounted yeomen without archers, then the primary purpose of them, since they're not that great in melee, and they won't be able to match up against other cavalry or be able to charge into melee infantry, the typical purpose is to send them around the flanks to hit archers and artillery. Skirmish Cav can just usually do that job just as well, but they also have ranged attacks for bullying the melee infantry. And here's the other great purpose of Skirmish Cav. They can also operate as your equivalent of warhounds. Running down fleeing enemy infantry is actually a really important job in Total War, especially if you're playing against, let's say, the Skaven, because the Skaven are so dependent on their infantry fleeing and then coming back, and then fleeing and then coming back again. You can get a lot of work done here, a lot of free kills, especially because routing units will never fight back. So what we've done here is effectively turn this from probably about 20 spearmen into 0, because these 8 spearmen are just going to run away. And the Skirmish Cav, which has terrible melee stats if you compare them to, let's say, Empire Knights, are nonetheless able to do a really good job of this. And let me turn off guard mode. If you have guard mode on automatically like I do, then yeah, you should turn it off for Skirmish Cav, because it's not very useful on them. So Skirmish Cav is very, very good, and I find that Skirmish Cav is one of the units that I can get the highest kind of gold to damage ratio out of, if used properly. And even if you don't feel like using them properly, you can still just set them to skirmish mode and just kind of let them bother the enemy. So, I hope that if you've not given Skirmish Cav a try, that you will, because they can be very worthwhile if used properly. And the Vampire Counts are, after all, the only faction in the game that does not have either Skirmish Cavalry or a Skirmish Cavalry equivalent. So it's kind of a valuable unit to learn for every race in the game except for one. And I gotta say, as someone who loves the Vampire Counts, I doubt that there's anyone who exclusively plays Vampire Counts. Alright, I hope you guys enjoyed... Oh yeah, those spearmen are fucking dead. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you, at the very least, learned something from it. And thank you for watching.